Hello, how you doing, and welcome back to the channel. The URC final is here, coming up this weekend. Munster travel to Cape Town to take on the Stormers, a match I'm really looking forward to. So in this video, that is what I'm going to look ahead to, speak a little bit about both teams, about the game itself, and why I think it's such an interesting match. You know, the teams come out later this week, so at this moment in time, just kind of going through it from that perspective. Make sure you drop a comment down below in the comments section. Who do you think is going to win this match? How do you see it going? Be really interested to see who you're all picking. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. But let's get into it. So I think this promises to be a really interesting game. The Stormers looking to go back-to-back, having won the competition last year, whilst Munster, I think, are a side that a lot of people wouldn't have predicted to get to this stage of the competition. I'm going to get into it in just a second, but the way in which they've tried to peak for the end of the season and the run they've had to go on to get to this stage is really quite impressive. Most people would have expected it to be Leinster in this final. As it is, Munster got the job done against them. An amazing result, an amazing finish to that game in the semi-final, which we've spoken about on this channel already. So it sets up this showpiece in Cape Town. And one of the most interesting parts of this final, I think, is we all know how good the Stormers are at home. I think I'm correct in saying this is their 6th straight home knockout game in the URC. If you have to go through Cape Town in a knockout game, they're a very difficult side to get the better of. The one side in recent memory that have got the better of them in Cape Town, it's Munster. Towards the back end of the regular season, 26-24, massive result for Munster, which got them into the playoffs in the first place. That was actually the Stormers' first defeat at home since 2021. So Munster will feel confident that they can get the job done here. We'd have all seen the video of the Stormers team when Munster beat Leinster in that semi-final, the celebrations for the Stormers, which I don't hold against them personally. It's a massive difference between having to go and face Leinster in Dublin rather than having a home game as the final. It's completely changed their 2 weeks build-up. I can understand why they were so pleased that it's Munster they're facing rather than Leinster. But as I say, I don't think Munster will be fearful of the job they are faced with. And it is a big job. I think most of us would probably have the Stormers as favourites. And I've mentioned Munster already. As I say, they had to go on this amazing run, really, to get to this stage of the competition. They've, what's this, their 6th straight away game, I think. The 3rd of which is in South Africa in the space of about 8 weeks. They had the draw against the Sharks, that victory against the Stormers. They've had brilliant away wins over Glasgow and Leinster in that semi-final, in those knockout stages. It seems like they're just riding this wave of momentum, which will contribute to the fact that they believe they can beat the Stormers this weekend. And also, just from a Munster perspective, obviously, historically, an unbelievable club with what we used to see them do in the Heineken Cup and picking up titles. They haven't won any silverware for 12 years. During that period, they've lost 3 finals. This makes a massive deal for them. This is a massive deal, this game, for Munster. So all those things I've spoken about so far, I think, just contribute to this being a really fascinating final. But let's look at the Stormers first of all. I mentioned that really impressive home record. Their record since joining the URC has been exceptional. They're the defending champions this year. They've lost just 8 of the 41 matches they've played in the competition since joining it. And this is their 6th straight URC home knockout game. You know, they have made everyone come through Cape Town, and we know how difficult a place that is to go. The other thing that actually has quite impressed me about the Stormers as well, that I wanted to mention in the video, something I saw it, I can't remember if it was on the Stormers website or the URC website, when I was kind of looking into a few bits and bobs. It struck me about the turnover of this squad that they've had to deal with, probably kind of since the 2019 World Cup, also since they joined the competition as well. In terms of the Springboks, they've lost with players like Sia Khaleesi and Steph Totoy, and they've had some big name guys that they've actually lost from this squad. They've dealt with everything they had to in terms of administration and all that sort of stuff before the start of the last URC season. So there's been a lot for John Dobson and those coaches and the power, the hierarchy, the powers that be at the club to have to deal with. And they've done so brilliantly, you have to say, in terms of getting to this point again, looking to go back to back. I think at this moment in time, they're a really impressive impressive squad and an impressive side. And I think that's reflected in the size of the crowds we're seeing. What was it? 40,000 for Connacht in the semi-final, 50,000 for the final. The game sold out in a matter of hours. I think it's going to be an absolutely brilliant, brilliant atmosphere. So they are building on those attendances. And I've mentioned it before on this channel probably quite a few times because I think the success of the URC is in part reliant upon the buy-in from the South African public. And I think maybe we're starting to see that. We've started to see it in the Champions Cup a bit with some of the good crowds we've had there. And I think we're seeing it with the Stormers and the success they are having. So hopefully this is, again, just another step on a platform they're building towards, because I think the URC could potentially be really, really successful when you really have galvanised that interest in South Africa. But let's get on to the match itself. I think it's important that Munster have had 2 weeks to prepare for this. I think having that gap with neither side being in the Champions Cup final, having 2 weeks to prepare, I think it's brilliant for Munster because obviously having a week's turnaround, we've seen what that has done to clubs in the Champions Cup. The Stormers, for example, having to go to Exeter on a week's notice for the knockout game in the Champions Cup. It makes the preparation so difficult. So I think the fact that it's 2 weeks from a Munster perspective is really important. And just even from a neutral's perspective, in terms of the interest of this game, it just slightly evens the playing field. I know the advantage is still with the Stormers with having it at home, having the home crowd and not having to travel that distance. But that 2 weeks, just that extra week for Munster to be able to get their preparation sorted, to be able to get at least a proper week of training in, I think is really important for this final and keeping it interesting, really. It's not like, I mean, that knockout game I mentioned, the Stormers against Exeter in Exeter, I think the travel had a huge say on who ended up winning that game. In terms of stylistically, now many of you watching this video would have probably watched more of Munster and the Stormers than I have in terms of in the URC this year. So you can drop a comment down below if you want to mention anything, which I don't. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things. But when I looked at both of these sides, I thought it was quite interesting that they're 1 and 2 in terms of averaging the most offloads per 80 minutes in the URC this season, which paints somewhat of a picture of how they like to play. Both sides like to get their hands free in the tackle, find the offload and play at a little bit of pace. And also Munster have averaged more carries than any other side per 80 minutes in the competition this season with 131, which is again kind of shows Munster a side that like to try and move the ball. And I suppose part of this is going to be whether they can move the ball enough against this Stormers side. I actually really like this Stormers side because I think they're one of the more well-rounded club sides in the world at the moment. With Marnie Libok at 10 and a number of the exciting players we see in that back line, well, they've put 40 points, haven't they, in their semi-final and quarter-final. They can score tries, but I think they also have kind of the muscle up front and the defensive side of the game to back that up, and the set piece with Kitsoff and Malherbe. They're really nicely balanced, the Stormers. And part of my question for this game really is, can Munster move the Stormers around that pitch enough, stretch their defence enough to be able to then have effective outcomes on the game? As I've said already, they'll be confident of implementing their game plan because of the fact that just a matter of weeks ago, they beat the Stormers in South Africa. But for me, maybe in this match, in this final, I think that's going to be a fascinating duel and a fascinating matchup. So who's going to win? Let me get onto that. We'll finish the video. Make sure you comment down below in terms of any other areas. I know there's a lot of other areas of the game that could be fascinating if we want to talk about the defences of both sides and the set piece. Part of that we'll get a better picture of when we get the teams. So make sure you comment down below with that. But who's going to win? As I say, can Munster break down and stretch that Stormers defence? Personally, I think I would give the advantage to the Stormers here. I think the fact that they're at home, they've had a couple of weeks to build up towards this. They're going to have 50,000 in the house. It'll be a brilliant atmosphere. Actually, credit to the Munster fans as well. I saw somewhere that it's expected about 5,000 Munster fans are going to be travelling for this, which is an unbelievable effort on 2 weeks' notice to sort yourself out and get your accommodation and flights and all the costs that they'll be incurring to get themselves to Cape Town. 5,000 travelling fans. If that is true, is absolutely unbelievable. So hats off to the Munster fans, who I know will make themselves heard, but I just give the edge in this game to the Stormers. I think they're a very difficult proposition beating in South Africa. I know Munster have done that already, but my gut instinct tells me that I think the Stormers will get the job done. You give me your prediction in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to the match. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.